This is Beyond the Big Screen podcast with your host, Steve Guerra. Thank you for listening to Beyond the Big Screen podcast, where we talk about great movies and stories so great they should be movies. Find show notes, links to subscribe, and leave Apple Podcast reviews by going to our website, beyondthebigscreen.com. And now, let's go beyond the big screen.
Welcome back. In last episode, we talked about the real Donnie Brasco story and how FBI Agent Joe Pistone underwent and infiltrated the Bonanno Mafia crime organization. Today, Mustache Chris and I are going to talk about the incredible 1997 film Donnie Brasco, starring Al Pacino and Johnny Depp. Mustache, what do you think about this film? Awesome? The greatest? Something in between?
It's for me, like, probably my top 5 favorite mob movies. It's not my favorite. I would say my favorite's Once Upon a Time in America. But this is definitely top 5. They're slightly different. Like, Once Upon a Time in America is not based on a true story. This one's based on a true story. But, yeah, I love this movie. Like, I probably watch it at least once or twice a year.
Oh yeah, I was trying to think of before we went on. I said I watched it last night just to get back into it, but I had watched it maybe a month ago just for fun. So, and I had since it came out in 1997, I think I probably watched it 25 or 30 times. Like, no joke. That might be a low estimate. And when we were recording the episode on Joe Pistone, I kept wanting to say like, oh, well, and Donnie Brasco, but trying to keep the fact and the fiction separated, which is something we'll do a little bit today, kind of compare and contrast the real story versus the fictionalized version of Donnie Brasco. And I wonder, just at the very high level, how do you think that this film did as far as realism?
Out of like all the mob movies that I've watched, and I've watched a lot of them, I would say this is probably the best one in terms of like realistically depicting mobsters. I find a lot of the times, like, a lot of these mob movies, they either present a lot of these mobsters as like psychotic killers or like really sophisticated type of criminals, where in reality, a lot of these guys they're street guys. They're blue collar street guys that you would probably, a lot of them, these are the same types of guys, like the conversations that they have and the way they talk are the same type of guys that you would, talk to at a construction site or at a sports bar.
That's what I thought. I felt that as far as the culture and the way that mafia people act, I think that this is bar none the best. And I also think as far as attacking the history, it made some compromises, and we'll certainly get into that as we talk. But I think overall, it stayed really true to the story, of course, with a couple of changes, but overall, very close to the story.
Yeah, I would say, given the time restraint, like 2 hours, this is about as accurate as you can possibly get. Like, you can watch this movie and yeah, you won't have the full story of the Joe Pistone story, but you'll have pretty much the general outline, how he infiltrated the mob, his character playing a jewel thief, his relationship with Lefty and Sonny. Probably the biggest glaring difference is like Donnie didn't have anything to do with the 3 Capo murders. We can get into, I thought they could have handled that a little bit differently, but I mean, if you watch this movie, you'll have a pretty good understanding of the Joe Pistone operation, the Donnie Brasco operation.
And I mean, as far as the cast goes, I think it's one of the best casts I've ever seen. You have Al Pacino playing Lefty. You have Johnny Depp as Joe Pistone, Michael Madsen as Sonny Black, Bruno Kirby, James Russo. His name might not be the most recognizable, but I think if people saw him, they'd know exactly who he was. Anne Heche is a great actress. Zelko Ivanek, I'm sure I butchered that, but he's been in a gazillion things. he's another one of those actors that his name might not necessarily ring a bell, but you've seen him in everything. Gretchen Mol, she had a really bit part, but she'd become a really big actress later on in the early 2000s and beyond. And then this is one of the early films of Tim Blake Nelson, who was in Buster Scruggs and where Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? And then Paul Giamatti was, and Gretchen Mol, Tim Blake Nelson, and Paul Giamatti had really small roles. Like, I think it was a really interesting mix of super established actors like Al Pacino, Johnny Depp, and then a lot of up and comers.
It didn't even dawn on me that was Tim Blake Nelson who was playing one of the FBI technicians. He's actually become a pretty accomplished director himself too.
Yeah, a really big cast. What did you think about the cast?
I thought it was perfect, especially Al Pacino was Lefty. He even kind of looks a little bit like him. Like, I pull up a picture of Lefty Ruggiero, and then, I mean, it's not perfect, but they kind of have the same look on their face, or I don't know how to describe it. Kind of like a little bit menacing, but kind of down and out. Michael Madsen, just, I don't know. To me, you can look at a picture of Sonny Black too, and he just looks the part, in my opinion.
I think the real Sonny Black would have been a little bit older than Michael Madsen at that point in his life. I think the real Sonny Black was closer to 50, and Michael Madsen looked like he was maybe in his lower 40s at that point, maybe upper 30s. So I think he got the even just the physically, Sonny Black was a really big guy, and Michael Madsen's a big guy. And I think the way Michael Madsen carried himself really captured Sonny Black.
It's interesting because when I was doing research for this movie, apparently, like, Al Pacino was trying out for the role of Sonny Black. And it's good that he got the Lefty role because, I mean, we can get into why they kind of changed the relationships around. Like, I have a theory about this, but like, yeah, Al Pacino would have been, I don't know, he would have looked too old to play Sonny Black, and he's too small, and he was just perfect as Lefty. So I think they changed a couple things up, and that,
I think the range of Al Pacino too, that he can play this kind of schmucky character of Lefty. Like, he's a tough mob guy on one side, but he's also like a nebbish hypochondriac, a guy, like, who putters around the kitchen. And you look at the stuff that Al Pacino has done, he's played just about every character you could possibly imagine. And he seems to nail, like, every character he is. It seems like it's the character he was born to play.
Yeah, you described it perfectly, because Al Pacino brings, the menacing character of Lefty, because Lefty is a menacing guy. Like, he talks about it in the movie and on tape in real life. You can go back to the last episode where, he talks about killing 26 people, and these are like up close murders. But at the same time, when you listen to the actual audio tapes of Lefty and listening to Joe talk about Lefty, you can see that there's a bit of humor there. Some of it unintentional and some of it intentional, but Al Pacino comes across like that. Even
reading Joe Pistone's book, I never got the exact feel of who Joe Pistone was, but I mean, Johnny Depp is awesome, and I think he captures a character of the person who has one foot in the clean-cut FBI agent in one hand, and then the foot in the world of the mafia guys, and how he weaves in and out. But then when he fully gets lost in the character later in the movie with his family, and you can physically, he never has to say it, but he acts it, and it all shows on his countenance and his face that he cannot pull himself out of being Donnie Brasco, that he really at that point was not Joe Pistone anymore.
And we talked about it on the previous episode where in real life, a lot of these guys like Lefty swore that Donnie was a wise guy, like right up until the end, even after he came out that he was an FBI agent and he was one of the reasons why he was going to jail. one of the scenes in the movie, it's like near the end, and Donnie says like, well, I become like one of these guys. And I mean, it kind of perfectly sums up how Lefty saw it. It's like, well, you might have been a cop at one point, but you're a wise guy. You know what I mean? Like you became a wise guy. You became one of us. And the movie does a very brilliant job of showing that passage.
I think that really makes me think too, that as much as Pistone said that he didn't do anything illegal, or like he did is very little, I think to prove yourself, especially to trick somebody like Lefty that you're one of them, he was up to it, to his neck in mafia stuff. There's just no possible way he wasn't. Joe Pistone, that is. He was beating up guys. He was, breaking legs. He was doing stuff like that. There's no way he wasn't.
I think he does. I think he admits to it, admits to doing some of that stuff. Well, yeah, I know for sure he did. He did admit to doing some of that type of stuff. And I mean, and there's that scene in the Japanese restaurant where they depict it. And there's like a moment where, Joe's like, what am I becoming? Right. Because he starts joining in on the beating too, of this, helpless waiter, that was trying to blow his cover because he had the wiretap in his cowboy boots. But yeah, like I think Joe, how much was Joe doing? I tend to agree with you. Yeah, that he was like neck deep in it. I get it to a degree. I mean, and the results speak for themselves, right? Like, he got 100 convictions, and they got inside information on one of the 5 families that just was not available to the FBI before. And all this information helped with the commission trial later on and the RICO cases. But I don't think Joe is as squeaky clean as he makes it out to be. I don't know. You can come on the show, Joe, and correct us if you want.
And I mean, you have to look at somebody like that. Joe Pistone can't stop being Donnie Brasco whenever he's undercover. He can't, because if he physically stops acting like Donnie Brasco, he can't afford for a second to let that facade fall, or they're going to find him out in a second, and he's going to be dead.
Well, that's exactly it, right? Like he has to have these guys so totally convinced 100% that he's Donnie Brasco, because if they're not, there's 2 options, right? The whole operation and all those years that he put in, and time that he put in just goes to waste, or they think he's an informant or something, or talking to the cops, and yeah, they'll just kill him. I mean, in their defense, like, I know this sounds weird defending them, but like, if you have like an informant, he's like telling on, say, Lefty or Sonny. I mean, at the end of the day, these guys have families too, right? Like, why should they have to go to jail for X amount of years because you decided you wanted to be an informant, even though you were helping us commit in all these crimes? Like, I understand their perspective. Like, they're looking at life in prison. I mean, and potentially the death penalty. I think it has only happened one time where a mob guy was actually got the death penalty, but I know in Joe Messino's case, they were pursuing it at one point, but we'll talk about Joe Messino in a later episode.
Steve here. We are a member of the Parthenon Podcast Network, featuring great shows like Richard Lim's This American President and other great shows. Go to parthenonpodcast.com to learn more, and here is a quick word from our sponsors. Yeah, I mean, really get to the point that just very minimally, if Joe Pistone blows this, he's thrown away probably millions of dollars of FBI resources. He's probably sunk the entire undercover aspect of FBI investigations, because the FBI was very hesitant of doing this kind of deep cover to begin with. And maximally, he's could get whacked out because of it. So, I mean, it's a very dangerous game he was playing. And I think that it really captured it in that scene where he was with couples counseling with his wife. And he almost morphs into it. Initially, he's trying to talk with the psychologist, and then the psychologist goes into like a full psycho babble rant. And instead of doing it like maybe a normal FBI white collar professional might just kind of blow him off, he's like, forget about it. And I think he said, he said some stuff that we won't share on the radio or on the program, but you can guess. And then he puts on his sunglasses, and you can tell he's turned back. He's not Joe Pistone anymore. He is Donnie Brasco. And then when they go out into the car and forget about it, and he, slams the door and, says a couple other choice words as well.
Yeah. And his wife calls him an animal. And, like even in that therapist scene, I can't remember exactly what the line is, but it's like kind of broken mob English or what have you. Yeah. And she points, it's like, I married a college man. Like, what's going on here? You know what I mean? Like a college. And Joe was a very smart guy, right? Like he did go to college, and I believe he got a degree. I think it was in anthropology, and he's somewhat of a historian, and he worked at naval intelligence. And, it's probably more difficult now to become an FBI agent, but it wasn't like they were just handing it out to everybody. You had to be a pretty smart individual to be able to become an FBI agent.
Yeah. And I mean, you look at it, they were living in a squeaky clean, probably upper middle class suburb. And it's a very different world when you're in the more working class part of Brooklyn. You're going to hear more choice language, and it's just it's a whole different attitude. Just a couple of miles in the suburbs, between the suburbs and being in the inner city of New York City, of how you have to act and how you have to behave.
Well, we're talking about a guy that like he looks up to J. Edgar Hoover, right? Like he talks about J. Edgar Hoover glowingly, and it's like, and then he's going into Brooklyn and these street bars talking with mob guys, right? It's a really the performance that he was able to pull off it's quite remarkable.
What were a couple of scenes that maybe stuck out to you, particularly that they really got the history right?
Well, the way, they speeded along. Like in real life, Donnie would go in and out of these social clubs at different times of the day or what have you, but kind of where Lefty comes up to Donnie and starts talking to him, because the other mob guys had been talking about, oh yeah, that's Donnie the Jewel guy, and he's kind of in the background. And then there's another scene where they're in front of the barber shop, and Lefty's asking Jilly from the Colombo family who Donnie is, because that's what actually did happen. Donnie worked for the Colombo family for a little bit, but he vouched for him, and those two scenes stand out to me in particular. I really enjoyed them. What about you?
I really thought that the scenes from Florida really captured something. Them hanging out at the hotel and having fun while they went putt-putt, and they were swimming in the pool and then partying. And then, of course, the scene on the boat, the Abscam boat, was really pretty historically correct. I mean, like you said, they sped up a couple of things, and there was a couple of minor things that they didn't quite get right. But I think overall that seemed pretty close to what Joe Pistone talked about, like in his memoir.
Yeah, you pointed out the time in Florida, and thinking about it right now, it's actually, that whole montage of them having fun is quite well done. It's pretty accurate too, because even Joe talks about like, Sonny was like a practical joker, and like Lefty less so, but like that's when they put the sand in his pockets and everything like that. But it really does capture like a lot of these guys they're just like kids, like playing on water slides and going to the beach and just having a good time. And one thing I would have liked to have seen in the movie, they left it out, but apparently Sonny Black used to challenge Joe Pistone to arm wrestles all the time, and Joe Pistone would beat Sonny Black all the time. And there was one time he goes to Joe And he says, well, I'm going to beat you in arm wrestling today. And Joe's like, what are you talking about, Sonny? Like, you never beat me. And then he's like, let's do it. And then they lock up arms, and Sonny just spits in his face and slams his arm to the ground. He's like, oh, I didn't tell you how I was going to beat you. Because a lot of the way Joe describes these guys, it's like, yeah, they were ruthless killers, but like they weren't just like 24/7 psychotic. Like they were pretty normal kind of guys that this is just what they did for a living. It's the way he describes it. And I think that, yeah, like you pointed out, that whole Florida scene kind of really captures that.
I get the sense too that they were probably not guys who took vacations very often. When you have a $30,000 a week vig that you have to pay to Rusty or whoever, there's not a lot of time to go on vacation. It's kind of like they're, workers in the modern world, like they can't afford to take a vacation. And I think when they had that chance for downtime, that they were kind of technically working too, they just enjoyed every scrap of that time.
Oh yeah, and yeah, you bringing that up, actually, you were talking about like scenes that are kind of true to reality. There's a scene where Sonny has become capo. Carmine Galante was killed, and he got upped, and he's, before that he was kind of just like a soldier, like a high-ranking soldier, but he wasn't like a capo, and he's stressing out in the social club because he's got to come up with I can't remember the exact amount of money, but he's got to come up with a significant amount of money every single month. Otherwise people are going to start getting whacked. And he's stressing out about it. And all these guys can come up as like these low end crimes. And you got like Lefty smashing like a parking meter on the table and it's driving him nuts. and it's, I think it's an aspect in the mob movies they don't really kind of touch all that much, is the, having to kick up this money is incredibly stressful. And it can also lead to people making like bad decisions, and and then even Sonny brings it up, like, you got all like 100,000 mobs, or is it exaggerating or what have you, all in New York City trying to, do all the same scams. And that's where the idea of going down to Florida comes from, simply because he's having a difficult time kicking the money up to the boss.
That was the thing too. That was another thing that I think they really captured, is that Florida really wasn't the Wild West. The boss of Florida, Santo Trafficante, and we touched upon this in the last episode, and there was a reason it wasn't filled to the brim with the mafia guys like New York, because Santo Trafficante and his dad, going back to almost the 1800s, made sure that Florida wasn't a mafia playground, that it was their tightly controlled ship, and they owned the police departments, and they owned basically everything they could to keep it as their operation. It was a trap for Sonny in a way, whether it was purposeful or not, but it wasn't the Wild West that Sonny thought it was going to be.
No, from my understanding, I do think that they were asked to go down there and start up this, the King's Court, which is accurately portrayed in the movie, this bar. But that was all set up it was kind of like a joint operation between like two undercover agents, right? Tony Rasta, I believe his actual name was
it? Or yeah, we talked about him in the last episode.
And Joe Pistone.
Rossi.
And it was this Rossi, yes. And it was facilitated by the FBI. There was a weird thing in the movie that they present the FBI agent in Florida as kind of like this bumbling idiot. Like, that maybe is one of the lower parts of the movie, because I just can't see this guy being able to like hang out with any of these mob guys. I just can't see it. Like, they would, I don't know, they'd probably beat him up or something, right? Like, he just does, like, he's totally not playing the part right at all. I guess maybe because he had money, I don't know, or because the FBI was feeding him money. I can't see these mob guys taking this guy very seriously or even having any conversations around him.
Steve here with a quick word from our sponsors. I think they couldn't have the real Tony Rossi portrayed because he was as good as Donnie Brasco was. And I think it just didn't, I think it would have been confusing. So they bring in this comic element just to keep the plot moving forward. And the guy's really, in the end, a throwaway character.
Yeah. I just thought that was
like a plot device, really, more than anything.
Yeah, maybe like, oh, look at this bumbling undercover cop. It makes Joe look makes Joe look that much better, right?
And that's a good transition into talking about some of the stuff that we don't think that it portrayed as very historically accurately. What are some things that stick out to you? I have a feeling there's at least one or two that we're both going to agree on for sure.
I would like to know like the reasoning why they left Anthony Mira out of the movie entirely. Like, do you have any theories on that? Because it seems kind of like a odd choice.
I think bringing in another guy, mob guy, it would have maybe confused things a little bit more, because you have Nikki Glasses, you have Anthony Mira who got cut, but they kind of mushed them into Lefty.
Yeah.
And I think maybe that's what they had to do. They had to have that dichotomy between Lefty and Sonny, that Sonny is this young guy who, younger guy who gets up to becoming capo, really leapfrogging Lefty, but it's because Lefty's a schmuck and Lefty is a soldier. He's not management material. And I think you start bringing in Anthony Mira and Nikki Glasses, and it's just more people you have to explain away. I think maybe if we were maybe doing this as a more of a mini series, you could have explored their characters a little bit more and wove them in. But in a 2-hour movie, I just don't think there was enough time to explain these complex characters.
Yeah, that's what I figured, right? Because if you add Anthony Mira in, then you got to talk about like Anthony Mira goes to jail, and that's how Lefty and them get like start hanging out, and then Anthony Mira comes back, and then you'd have to have like the sit downs between Lefty and Anthony, or Sonny and Anthony, and who does Joe Pistone belong to? Because like that was like a big part of the actual Joe Pistone story. He could have been killed, and those sit downs didn't go the right way. Because like Anthony started lying that he was stealing drug money and all this stuff. I don't know, maybe he was. I doubt he was, but so yeah, you would have had, it would have just, I don't know, you'd probably be looking at a 3-hour movie at the end. It added Anthony Mira.
Yeah, or a fully developed one series Netflix series or something. I think that could have you could have got in. That would have been a great part of the action, I think, of a 10-episode series on Joe Pistone. But in a way, one thing that I thought, we'll leave the juiciest inaccuracy to the end, but I think as the movie started getting to the end, I felt like they were playing a little looser with the actual story of where Joe essentially stole $300,000 to buy Lefty a boat. Like, did that come from anything you read? I didn't ever see anything like that, or any of the stuff like, and I'm also wondering if you read was the conflicts that Joe was having at home, is there any record of any of that stuff actually happening? He kind of alludes to that there was some home problems, but the nitty gritty of it and the detail, was there any stories that Joe had told at this point that you ran across?
The 300,000, I don't know anything about that. Like, from what I've read, I think that's just made up. I think that was just like a plot device that they used to emphasize the relationship between Lefty and Donnie, and how Donnie actually really did care about Lefty, and he felt bad about turning these guys in, essentially, and he mentions that in the movie, I'm basically signing their death warrant once I come out, right? Because they're going to kill him, right? I might as well just put the bullet in myself. And Donnie, I guess he stole that money maybe for personal reasons at one point, being like, screw the FBI, they're not paying me enough to do this crap. Like, I'm going to take this money. But which is probably accurate because in actuality, like you got like a $500 check or something and a medal, and that was it for 6 years of his life. I mean, $500 back then, it was worth a lot more. It wasn't worth that much more. Yeah, and the stuff at home, Joe said it like there's a scene where he hits his wife, and Joe was like apparently super pissed that they added that in the movie. Like that never happened. He goes like things were rough. Obviously he's an undercover cop for 6+ years infiltrating the mob, and he can't really tell his wife what's going on because for his safety too, but for his own for their safety too, right? So there's like as little connection between them as possible. But Joe talks about how he was really pissed that they added that scene where he smacks his wife around. He said that never happened, but apparently fought with the director about it, and the director's like, no, it's staying in the movie. So
I didn't I liked it for the film, but the whole thing, I mean, it's clearly not accurate that as the film is winding down, it's getting Donnie and Joe are completely melding into one person, and the film is leaving you that will Joe Pistone win out and send all these people to prison, or is he going to fully turn into Donnie Brasco and break bad? And the film kind of carries you through to that. And I just think that if there was any question at all that he was going to go bad, I think the FBI would have pulled him. I think they were going to be so on top of that to make sure that he was completely on the straight and narrow as far as that goes, because it would have jeopardized all the years of work, all the money of the investigation, and ultimately it would have jeopardized any convictions that they would have planned to get out of it. Because it's not like everything that the government was trying to do to bring down the mafia was 100% focused on Joe Pistone. They're doing a million other investigations to try and get the mafia. They're not going to let one person ruin it all.
Oh yeah, for sure. And that was like the major argument of things. Like Joe at one point was very close to becoming a made guy, but then he turns and, like, actually I'm an FBI agent. Well, how did you become a made guy in the mob family, Joe? Like, what did you do? It calls into question his integrity and his testimony. That was one of their arguments. I mean, it makes sense in my opinion.
Getting into the elephant in the room really is the murder of the 3 capos. I mean, this is one of the most famous events in all of mafia history, really, or at least modern mafia history. And we've talked about it, on 3 episodes, and we'll probably talk about it on a couple of more too. I know you've set this up before, but really briefly, what's the murder of the 3 capos?
Carmine Galante was the unofficial acting boss of the Bonanno family. As Rusty Vastelli was in jail, so he kind of like took things over. He ends up getting murdered. They get permission from the commission to do this. Carmine Galante was not a well-liked individual by the rest of the mafia, and even his own family. He was very greedy, very ruthless. But he had surrounded himself with Zips, Sicilians, straight from Sicily. When he was killed, basically the Bonanno family kind of broke into like 2 factions, where there was the more Sicilian faction led by Sonny Red, and the faction that was loyal to Rusty Vastelli, who was in jail. Who would, and it sounds bizarre that you'd have a mob boss in jail, but you get into a little bit. It's actually not that uncommon. Like Carmine Persico spent a good chunk of his life in jail, and he was head of the Colombo family, right? So, people like Sonny Black and Joe Massino, they get information that the Sicilian faction is starting to stockpile like weapons, and they go to the commission, and Paul Castellano and believe it was Carlo Gambino at the time, said, you know what? Do what you got to do, right? So they get permission and they lure these three capos into a social club and just murder them.
They in the movie it's not in a social club, it's in Sonny Red's basement, and Joe Pistone is actually there. Donnie Brasco is actually, he doesn't commit any of the murders, but he helps dispose of the bodies. And it was really almost nothing about that scene except for the fact, I think there was the one scene or the one part where they shoot Big Trini, and he's absolutely the mountain of a guy. He's strong and he's way overweight. I think that did actually happen, where they shot him so many times in real life, but he still kept coming after them.
Yeah,
that happened.
No, that actually did happen. Yeah.
But other than that, nothing really was. And the way they disposed of the bodies, didn't they find Sonny Red whole in a parking lot, like just barely covered in dirt?
Yeah, they did a pretty bad job taking care of them. I believe it was like a mafia graveyard, and like John Gotti gave them permission to use it. Yeah, they found Sonny's. I think it was like a week or 2 weeks later. I think it was some kids were the ones that found him, right? So they obviously didn't bury him very good. Yeah, but I mean, I don't know why they did it like this, because why they had Donnie involved in, because Donnie had nothing to do with this at all, right? Not disposing of the bodies, had nothing to do with the murders. I mean, they could have just have shown it on. I get why they included it in the movie, because it's like a big part of the Bonanno family story at this time, is this three capo murders. It's probably one of the most important things in the Bonanno family history. It's just Donnie didn't have any. I don't know why they included Donnie in the murders. They could have just had done the murders, and Lefty talks about I don't have to worry about Sonny Red anymore. I don't have to worry about, that's all taken care of. Joe Messino's the boss now. Sonny's moving on up, and that means we're moving up. You know what I mean? They could have done something like that.
Or if they wanted to show it, why not show it in a real club and do it like they did it, where Donnie is out in the car. So you kind of massage the truth a little bit to get Donnie there, because I believe I read somewhere that they said that somebody said they wanted Donnie there, but one of the other mobsters said that they didn't want him there. I want to say it was Sonny Black said he didn't want him to be there, but I could get that all confused. But there was discussion of whether Donnie should have gone or not, and he wasn't at the point where they completely trusted him, because this is one of the most sensitive operations that any mobster has ever done, really.
Yeah, I wouldn't have wanted him there. I mean, we know what Donnie ended up becoming, right? Well, what he was, right? But even at the time, it's this would have been the 6th year. And I mean, yeah, 6 years is a fair amount of time to know somebody, but to do something like that, no, this is stuff I want to do with people I literally grew up with, right? Which a lot of these guys, they all grew up in the same neighborhoods. They've all known each other since they were kids.
And I would have loved to have seen this again in a miniseries where they could have introduced Vito Rizzuto and gotten into the Sixth Family aspect of it. That would have been really interesting. Steve here again with a quick word from our sponsors.
Oh yeah, for sure. I think there is a real potential if they ever wanted to revisit this story. They could probably do a good five-part series on it, because there, as much as they did leave out a fair amount, just how the three capo motors actually went down. I mentioned in the notes it would have been cool to see in the Carmine Galante hit, considering it's one of the most famous hits in mob history. Especially for the pictures are really brutal, guys. So you can take a look at them if you want, but he has a cigar in his mouth. That would have been interesting to see that. It would be interesting to see the zips, and kind of how that all played out, because they don't really talk about it all that much in the movie.
I think Lefty mentions the zips once. And you even go back to the series we did on Bad Blood. They really didn't talk about the zips at all in that either.
Yeah, it's one of the more fascinating aspects of the mob around this at this time period too. And then it's bizarre that not many people like. I'm surprised they really haven't made a movie about the pizza connection. I know they did the French connection, but I'm surprised they haven't done anything about the pizza connection. And that probably would be a couple part series once we get into that, because like Joe testified at that trial too.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Another inaccuracy with the three Capo murders is that they show Lefty shoot Nicky Santoro because they thought that, I don't even remember. I think because they thought he cheated Sonny Black out of money in Florida, and Nicky Santoro lived a long life after that, and I think he became an underboss or something, or he ties back in with Sal the Iron Worker, Montaigne, and all these other guys. So I think that as the movie progressed, it started to give up a little bit more on accuracy for storyline and drama.
Well, and the Lefty wasn't even at the shooting itself. Like Lefty was playing the watch guy, and then he helped dispose of the bodies. I mean, they probably should have got somebody better to do it, because they obviously didn't do a good job covering up Sonny Red. But yeah, like Lefty didn't shoot anybody at three Capo murders. So
yeah, who was, I can't. It was Vito Rizzuto, Sonny Black, and a couple other people. It was
Joe Messino, George
really
Shosh,
was Cesare Bonaventre. Was he or was he on the other faction? There's so many different names. We have to have one of those maps where they have all the pictures with the lines. Maybe we'll
string
post
on the wall or whatever, like the old like the old cop TV shows or what have you.
Yeah, I think we'll have to post something like that on a website or something somewhere, because you really need that map to keep it all straight. And this is really just one family. I mean, we could start tying in John Gotti and other players into this. I mean, it's unbelievable how intertwined all this is. You need that map with the string and the mugshots of these guys to keep it all straight.
Yeah, down the road we're gonna do like a basically an entire episode on just these murders, the three Capo murders, because you really can do an entire episode on it, where we'll break down like all the individual players, Sonny Red and the Son and Sam Giancana, and like, because it is one of those moments it's one of the most important moments in mob history.
Now, just to wrap up this movie, I guess, I mean, I think we put all our cards on the table that we both love this movie, and we've talked a little bit about what we didn't like about it or what we thought we could do better. Like, if you had to, as a way to wrap this episode up, what would you have added to it, maybe, to make it even better? Like, what one scene do you think from the whole Joe Pistone thing that would have, we've talked about a bunch of different things, but what's the one thing that you think would have really made this movie much better?
If you listen to Joe talk about Sonny Black, from everything that I've read, that Joe was actually the person he felt closest to was Sonny Black. It wasn't actually, like, he felt close to Lefty, but the person he felt closest to was Sonny Black. He was the guy he liked spending the most time with, right? He said Sonny Black was a very relatable guy, and he could actually turn off being a mobster and just like kind of joke around and talk about sports and do jokes and what have you. I would have liked to have seen that in the movie more, where in the movie they kind of depict the relationship as like Sonny Black is, I mean, obviously in real life, Sonny Black was the boss, he was Joe's boss, but like the relationship was kind of distant.
Yeah, exactly.
It wasn't close like the relationship like Donnie and Lefty had. But from my understanding, like Donnie, yeah, he liked Lefty, but like Lefty drove him nuts, about that was one cool thing they did in the movie where Lefty keeps on going on about drafts and the smoking in the car. Like that actually happened, and it would drive Joe nuts because Lefty would chain smoke in the car, but you weren't allowed to open the window, otherwise he'd start losing his mind. But yeah, I would have liked to have seen him explore that relationship more because, like, at the end of the movie, it makes it seem like Lefty was the one that's like, oh, if somebody had to take me out, I'm glad it was Donnie. But in actuality, we don't know if anybody actually felt like that. But according to Sonny Black's girlfriend, this is what Sonny said about Donnie. He's like, well, if someone was going to have to do it, take me out. I'm glad it was a guy like Donnie. And because he knew that he wasn't going to turn witness, and he was going to go out and, he was going to get hit, and that was that, right? I think he understood that, in his world, he deserved it. And I think there was even Donnie talks about it, like the real Donnie, he had hoped that Sonny would turn witness. Not only because it would help his case, but because I don't think he wanted to see Sonny get whacked. And I don't think he wanted to see Lefty get whacked either, right? And Lefty he ended up getting caught by the cops before he did get whacked. He probably was going to get whacked too.
Yeah, that was another difference, is that in the movie he gets whacked, but in real life, Lefty, he did some jail time, I think, but then he just pretty much lived the rest of his life. He died of natural causes when he was pretty old.
Well, and in the movie, they make it seem like he wasn't upset with Donnie, but in actuality, like he said, like, if I ever get my hands on Donnie, I'm going to kill that, bleeping. And according to Joe, like what he did, he got out of jail because he had terminal cancer. I believe he had already served 15 years at that point. Which is just really bizarre when, this guy, they have him on tape. I don't know if they had him on tape exactly saying that he did 26 hits, but let's just say he had him on tape talking about killing 26 people. And he ended up only doing 15. It's really bizarre. Apparently, like when he got out, like the very first thing he did was go to like members of the Gambino family talking about like, well, how can I get to Donnie? Because he wanted to kill him.
And really, I think that's where we can leave off today. If you have ideas for shows, or if there's something you want to see us go even deeper into, just shoot us an email or contact us on social media, all the different places. And I know I'm excited to talk more about the Mafia. We're just scratching the surface. All right, with that, we will catch you next time.